Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday posting. This is one of our last postings of the glossary, and we're up to late in the W's. We as a whole. We as a whole. This term refers to the whole of the social field at any given moment, as this field carries and expresses the relative balance of the real we and the false we within politics as a contested ontological terrain. Now, when I'm saying politics here, I'm talking about the whole of the effort of the society to make itself. So it includes culture. It's a very broad definition of what in chapter 7 I call really a struggle between the real we, the struggle to be born as a true community, and the false we, which is something like the opposite of that, a state of separation where people imagine themselves to be underneath institutions and carrying out their roles, but feeling passive and not like co-creators of the world. So there's a tension. And if you go back and look at the videos for real we and false we, you'll get a sense of each. In terms of their relative balance at any given moment in the society, that's what I mean by the we as a whole in the book. And so remember that as I see it, these are constantly rotating. The real we is not an entity, but it's a rotation of affirmation from one person to the other. Just as the false we is. For example, when the newscaster talks like this and everyone is participating in the role systems of the world, well, when you're watching that with millions of other people, you're all separated by the artificiality of the newscaster. We are all separated. So we are all part at that moment of a socially separated, withdrawn world, peering out at someone acting unreal, acting as if he were real, but playing a part or playing a role out of fear of the other. So when fear of the other is preeminent, then the false we becomes preeminent as a rotation in the society that everyone succumbs to, is conditioned to, and then succumbs to. The little boy is born into the world. He's conditioned to adopt a boy role in the world. He wants to do well in school, then make it in American competitive market society, go to the best schools, get good grades. The whole thing is a performance unless something is born inside that child that makes, in this case, him able to break out and become someone who can begin to create a new world that's based not on these fearful performances, but on authentic, vulnerable making, empowered community. So we have the rotation of the false we constantly going on, and the rotation of the real we always trying to be born, passing from one to the other when it can be born. Think of the social field, the social world, as a moving field in which these two tendencies are competing for ascendancy. So the social field is not a thing as you look out at it. It's a moving reality in which the birth of the real we and the container of the false we are competing for preeminence or ascendancy. And the emphasis in all these videos and in the book is the real we is trying to be born. That is the evolutionary struggle of man and womankind right now is for the real we to be born, to transform our institutions, our ways of everyday life, so that authentic mutual recognition enters into it as the way that we are with each other. It's hard to imagine a future reality in the present moment of that kind, but that is the only place to go to end wars and to end the tremendous inequality, suffering, poverty, isolation of this world, is to realize a new consciousness trying to be born, a consciousness of the other and of us in mutual recognition. So what's happened up to now, historically, is there have been spirals of the real we trying to be born, and those are revolutionary moments. And they don't have to be physical revolutions where you separate from the British or you seize the Winter Palace. It can be a revolution in culture. Here, the 1960s was a remarkable example in which, if you recall, whether you were alive or not, if you've got it in you from what's passed on to you, and the videos that you may have seen, the drumbeat of the civil rights movement, African Americans coming out of those churches into the streets, refusing to give up their seat, Martin Luther King giving tremendous speeches from the heart about who we can become with each other, defining justice as love correcting that which revolts against love. Love as the basis of human life, not just non-discrimination, but love. So there are, the 60s was an example where the real we spiraled up to such an extent that one could feel, you could feel, there were two realities competing. The evening news and all the conventions of the society that was keeping the war, the Vietnam War, going. And then this whole other drumbeat of a new reality in which movements were bubbling up like bubbles in a boiling pot. The pot was boiling. So you had the civil rights movement, the women's movement being reborn, the gay and lesbian movement, and bisexual transgender movement, the environmental movement, all at the same moment, because the sense of we are going to take over social space, we are going to lay claim to the social field, was happening in a way that you could feel wasn't clear which way the world was going to go. Now, the way the world went was that the real we faded, the false we reasserted itself. With the election of Ronald Reagan had a certain finality to that. If you lived through it historically, everybody ran for the hills after Reagan's second election, thinking it was over. Of course, it's not over. It's not over. The legacy of those years is still very powerful in American culture, transforming it for the better. Full of mistakes, but transforming it for the better. So what I'm saying is there are spirals upward that drive history forward in an evolutionary sense toward the breakthrough when the real we gains enough confidence in itself to sustain itself, not just have a hot moment of community, but sustain itself over time. So the we as a whole, this term that we're defining today, the we as a whole is what is the balance at any given moment. And speaking frankly, at the present moment, the false we is overwhelmingly dominant in American culture, so that most people are depressed at some level. They have a low level of depression. We feel withdrawn from one another, leading lives that are mainly a lot in our heads, a lot private. Even when we're working on campaigns It feels good to work on campaigns, but it's still a bit like throwing, I don't know what to say, throwing things in the ocean. It's difficult right now. It's difficult from a mobilized society where you feel a tremendous upsurge across social space. And that happened, as I said, for a period of time in the 60s, a long period, maybe 10 years. And it happened periodically. It happens in natural disasters. Sudden explosions of community break out in the midst of everybody's routinized passivity and withdrawn state. And I'll give one more example that is an everyday example in the labor movement, and that is when you're organizing a union in a workplace. My partner is a union organizer, and you get a committee together and you try and organize to have people vote to want to have a union. There is a moment in organizing campaigns, in some organizing campaigns, when everybody decides to declare that they are organizing their workplace, and they put on a button, the button of the union. In my partner's case, it's Local 2, the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union in San Francisco. When everybody puts on their button and goes to work, suddenly there's a very striking feeling of a real we being born. Out of the passivity of all these employees, separated by the structure of work and the rotation of alienation and separation, withdrawnness, people emerge from their separation, declare their solidarity and their power, and put on a button. And that is an amazing experience, if you've ever witnessed it, of a little ripple of a real we being born. Now, at any time, all the time, there are ripples like that going on in the society, every place. My son's a hip hop performer. They have their ripple that they're co-creating in the music world. There are ripples, and that's an important ripple. I know that in the refugee camps in the Middle East, that often the first thing that breaks out is hip hop. Someone gets up on a pile of rubbish and begins to perform this amazing rhythmic way of being present. Let's put it that way. So the we as a whole is this balance at any given moment. In this book, I focus mainly on the Bernie Sanders moment, when Bernie Sanders was contesting for the Democratic primary, and you could feel in 2016 a real we starting to be born. Here's a man who says he's a socialist. You imagine, even today that would be difficult because we've receded from that moment. He says he's a socialist. Her youth are showing up in large numbers at his rallies. People are overcoming their despair and getting excited. You may have heard the phrase, feel the burn. So feel the burn means, what does it mean? It's a metaphor for how people were feeling that was burning inside. There was something that was cold, was getting hot. How about that? Feel the burn actually referred to this enlivening of a real we being born. Now, Bernie lost, and it was a big loss in public space for that impulse, but it's a recent example that shows something was happening that pulled many young people in suddenly into politics and wanting to change things. That many people joined Democratic Socialists of America, which, by the way, does not have this exactly the worldview I'm presenting here. It's not based on consciousness the way I'm speaking, but But nevertheless, it symbolized a break and a new pathway and a new hope. So, okay, so the we as a whole is the balance at any given moment. And if you become aware of that balance, well, for one thing, when the balance is bad, as it is now, wait, don't despair. Keep making ripples, and at some point the ripples will catch each other. You don't know when that'll happen, what the circumstance will be that will lead it to suddenly burst out into the open, but it will happen. And my confidence, really, for some reason, is that this eventually will overwhelm the legacy of fear of the other that the false we is dependent upon. The routinized separation and despair that people have come to accept in the solitude of their individualistic lives will be overcome by the spirit of love within everybody's heart, longing to get out.